Hi, I'm James Floyd Kelly. Welcome to episode 6 of Novel Ideas. I'm here with my friend Erik Wex. We are up to 6 episodes. We're doing
Woohoo!
great. Eric, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am well. I see you've got somebody here.
I do. I want to introduce James Wood. He's the current remaining member of our critique group.
There's an attrition rate.
There is an attrition rate in our critique group, but that probably means it's a good critique group. But we'll get into that too a little bit. So.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that you invited James because I told you last week that I wanted to talk about writing groups, and more specifically, we're going to talk about critique groups. And I'm already wanting to make sure that we understand we're on the same page. Writers groups. I've been a member of a writers group. When you say critique group, what are you talking about?
I need to be careful here because I think writing is a solitary profession. And I think it is good to get together when you're in a solitary profession, to get together with other cats, right? We're not dogs, we're cats, right? And you get together with other cats and you be cats. That's good. But there's a difference between, getting together and drinking with friends and actually doing something with a writer that gets stuff done. Yeah. So James and I really emphasize that our group is a critique group, because the goal is to actually improve each other's writing skills, which means we have to be presenting work and letting the other person criticize it in order to make it better. Yes. And that is not always a comfortable process, that's for sure.
Hey, James, let me ask you this. When you when you have a critique group, is it my assumption correct that you come to the critique group already having your story out, you know where your story is going? It's not a place to pitch ideas, correct?
Yes, but as we've evolved, we'll have a story done, and then we might pitch an idea to each other, and we'll work through stuff. We've done outlining together, and we've done story critique together and chapter critique together. So we're learning the process of being a critique group as we're doing it. And one of the reasons we had such a high attrition rate is because there were a couple of guys that weren't writing. They would come and they would critique the stuff, but they weren't in the process of writing, and so it felt more like criticism than helpful building up critique. And there was no reciprocity there, and that sort of derailed what we were doing.
Yeah.
Now, do you guys meet? Obviously, you're there physically in person, but when you were talking about you had other members, are you all local? Are you talking about a physical meeting, or did you meet like we're doing?
We were. I think it could work easily over a Hangout, and we've met, there will be times where James or I will write ourselves into a corner, and it'll be 2 in the afternoon, and it'll be like, can you meet me on Google Hangout and try to sort this out? So we've done that before,
yeah.
But most of the time when we're actually critiquing each other's stuff, we try to meet in person.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. To get back to the idea of writers group versus critique group, it sounds like what you're saying is that you guys are working on sort of a game plan for how best. Every critique group is going to be different. You sound like you're trying to still define what you're going to offer to one another.
Yes.
What sort of services you offer one another.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
And if I understand correctly, it's just the 2 of you, right?
I think we would like to be 3.
Yeah.
I think 3 would be a little better, 3 or 4. But we give, James and I are pretty good writers, and so we give each other a lot of work. And one of the problems is if we were 5, even 4 would be really hard to keep up with the amount of work that is being produced. And so the advantage of keeping it small is that you get through a lot more of your stuff in a lot faster time frame.
Yeah.
The disadvantage of keeping it small is that I only have James's opinion, and sometimes we end up in kind of groupthink, and we're not very aware of other demographics that we might want to sell our book to and what they're going to actually think of this.
Yeah.
Got it. Hey, James, question for you. When you guys are giving work to one another, is there a sort of a tit for a tat? Are you both working on chapter 1 at the same time, or are you sometimes off schedule? How do you kind of keep it fair?
So far, we've kept it fair just because we're both cranking as fast as we can and trying to get stuff out. It has been good that we've been, Erik will be sort of mid-novel as I'm starting something, and that's been a good rhythm to things. But we've been more working on the actual, the content of the critique rather than, how we're lining stuff up. So I think that's a problem for a later time right now.
When we were starting, we were very free with our critique. Critique, you hand somebody the writing and they can say what they want about it. And what I felt happened in that was that someone would say, I don't like it when your character did this. They should do X. And one of the things that I think we have learned is that when you tell an author how to fix their problem, rather than leave the critique on what do I not like about this scene, that's where a critique gets dangerous. It's not that you shouldn't ever do that. There are times where a good suggestion from James is really, really important. But there are times where that actually just deflates me. Where I'm in the middle of something and I've worked really, really hard at something and it didn't work. And then to be told, well, if you just did X, Y, Z, it would be fine. That just instantly sends me back into I'm a bad writer and blah 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 and all that negative energy that you really can't have if you're going to get something done. So
where are you two guys? The podcast that we're listening to that we think Jim should listen to.
You mentioned it. Go ahead and state it. What is it?
Writing Excuses with Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, and they just had a podcast on writing critique, and I noticed in that they caught themselves at a point, and they said, "I'm about to try to fix your story for you. I know I shouldn't do that," and then they still went on and said it, but it was taken in that vein of like, "I'm just gonna throw this out there. It's outside the boundaries of what we're doing," and I felt really validated. Like we came to that organically, and that these professional writers farther down the professional road than we are, we're at that same spot, and that was sort of like a mental high five.
Yeah, it was good.
That's cool. I will check it out. And Eric, please remember to put a link on your website to it so that so our viewers can find it. Well, let me throw a question at you now. Where are you guys now with your critique group? Like, what does James put in Eric's hands, and Eric, what do you have in James's hands?
Right now, we've been on a bit of a lull. So James went on a choir tour to France in July, and I've been really doing copy editing and publishing stuff. So I haven't been producing a lot. So this is the first time that we've gotten together in about a month.
Yeah, it's been too long.
It's been too long. But we try to meet every other week, and usually somebody every other week has something that they need done. Right,
I kind of know what you're working on, or what you're going to start working on. James, what are you working on right now, or what are you?
Current work in progress is the series title is World Song. I think the title for the novel will be The Exiled Monk, and it's a fantasy novel. Probably gonna be YA in there. Yeah, he's telling me it's gonna be YA,
but which means the adults should read it too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But it sort of follows a young boy as he learns about the magic in his world and sort of his place in that. I like to think of it, this may not be the best term, but I think of like intimate fantasy rather than epic fantasy. So epic is you have the one ring to save the world,
right?
And this is a kid who's trying to save his village.
Got a small quest. I gotcha. How far along are you in this? Have you just started plotting it, outlining it, or?
So I'm on about my 5th rewrite right now, and I am terrified of the beta reader feedback that I need to go through. So I would say it's plot complete, and now it's sort of polish, and Eric helps me work on character stuff.
And James helps me make sure that I'm not boring, because I love character, and he's like, I'm so bored. Give me something to do. And so, this is one of the other things I would say about a critique group that's really important. When you look at the 4 doorways, which we've talked about previously on this podcast,
right.
James is definitely a plot-driven reader. I'm a character and world-building reader. James can't get through Tolkien's Lord of the Rings because it bores him to tears at the beginning. And I love the Lord of the Rings for Tom Bombadil. I think Tom Bombadil's wonderful, right? Yeah. So that's the difference between us when we read. And having that difference in the critique group, I think, gives it enough tension that we're actually really improving each other's work.
So I heard you mention beta readers. So you actually sort of, I understand now why the critique group has sort of taken a backstage, and now I assume you guys have different beta readers for your
Yeah.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you're not, and you wouldn't consider yourself beta readers for each other, right? Because you're probably too close to the story by the time you guys get done with the critique part of it, right?
Yeah.
We'll end up co-authoring something someday. I'm sure it'll happen because there's a lot of James in my work, and a lot of me in his.
That's true.
Well, let me ask you this. A critique group. You've already mentioned that you think that 4 is probably the maximum you would want. How would someone go about? I mean, it's kind of that's probably a hard question to ask, but how would you go about starting a critique group? I mean, I'm a loner. I work in my office. I write by myself. I don't have other people to say, here, read that. And I have editors.
So I think you need to go to those writers groups that we talked about that aren't critique groups and sit there and drink your Coke or drink your beer or whatever you want to drink. And then you need to look around the room and find the people who are actually publishing.
Mm-hmm. Who are actually putting on the net.
Right, and in any writers group, there's a large percentage of people saying, I want to start my first novel, I'm just about to do it, and they're never going to get anything done. And you run. Yeah. Run. Don't let them know that you're doing a critique group. Don't hang out with them. It's bad juju. You don't want those people around. They'll gum up the works. So find the people who are actually publishing stuff or are at your stage, and they've got the drive to finish it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And those are the people you want to deal with.
Do you have any advice for do you recommend trying to stay sort of in a close genre? I mean, I know you said, James, you're sort of fantasy, and Erik, you're sort of science fiction, but there's still fiction. Does that matter? I mean, obviously, I don't want to read like fantasy. I love fantasy. I don't want to read fantasy romance. So I would have a hard time critiquing somebody who wanted critiquing on their fantasy romance novel.
Yeah, so I think there's something to that. I think the critique group needs to be somewhere close to your wheelhouse, because I don't know the rules of romance. I don't know, and I'm not a romance reader, so I don't know what that crowd is going to expect. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's probably wise that you kind of stick closer to genre. I think with fantasy and science fiction, they're both speculative fiction. They're both imagining places and futures, and that I think is close enough. And I like James's genre, and he likes mine, so yeah, it works.
And I'm sure Erik's going to write fantasy in the future, and I've got works in progress in the pipeline that are sci-fi. So yeah,
I want to get out of this hard sci-fi. As soon as I get this series done, I would just I want the rules off a little bit more. Where things are more fungible. Right now, the things that kill me are like. What does a nuke do in space? That I will spend 3 days trying to figure out what would happen if you blew a nuke up 50 miles away from the ISS, the International Space Station. And there are people who talk about that online.
Yeah, you should try vampires. I hear they're hot right now.
That sparkle.
Well, no, the new one is if they vibrate. That's
vibrating vampires.
Yeah, okay. Vibrating vampires are the new in thing right now. Well, let me ask you this. You talked earlier about rules. You said you guys, you have a number, the maximum size of who it is. You also have rules about work. So you've got to be contributing and critiquing at the same time. Are there any other rules that you guys, sort of unwritten rules that you guys abide by in a critique group?
We actually created a set of rules based on the 4 doors, and it took us a year to get to that point. Mm-hmm. But once Erik had brought the 4 doors kind of idea, and we were struggling, and both of us were feeling like the critique wasn't helping. We weren't getting better as writers because of the critique that we were doing, and it clicked into place, and we were shooting emails back and forth, and we decided so 2 things. One is it can't all be negative, right? We have to point out what we like. We have to point out where we're doing good work. If it's all negative, then it's just this emotional drain, and it feels like, I'm a terrible person, I'm not a writer, this is all crap. And then using the 4 doors, what we did is we took a scale of 1 to 5, so with 3 being average, 3 just being a gentleman's C, and it's good. It doesn't it doesn't bother me, and it doesn't excite me. And then we go through, and each chapter or chunk of work that we're critiquing will assign a 1 to 5 score for plot, character, setting, and language.
Mm-hmm.
And then that helps us to a little bit more objectively negotiate our differences. So I'm the plot dude. If Erik gets a 5 on plot, he that's like winning. He's awesome. Yeah. Also, if Erik gets a 5 on character, that's probably even more, because he took a guy who doesn't really dig the character stuff and made me really care. But then he can also look and see, oh, the language is a 2 here, so that sort of took it below. If he gets 3s on character and plot, it didn't bother me, it kept me in the story, and so we sort of look and see, I need at least one thing for each chapter or section to be above average, and I need nothing to be below average. And then we'll get more detailed, a paragraph or so of critique for each section.
So for instance, a great for instance is, I am very satisfied in my novel if I come in at 3 to 3.5 on my language. Okay. My novel is not driven by being beautiful with its words. Mm-hmm. Now, the short story I'm currently writing, and some of my short stories, I really actually want those words to matter. And sure. So if I'm coming in at 3 on the short stories with the words, that kind of ticks me off. And I actually would like to go back and read and change it. But the reason to divide out the 4 pieces, and this is I think the important point for me, is that when you're critiqued on each of the 4, you know what specifically in that chapter you need to work on, which is so much more helpful, so much more usable critique than, I didn't like that chapter, and here's the section I didn't like. This paragraph sucks, right? Well, I have no idea why it sucks. I have no idea what the relationship of that is to the rest, and so by giving those 4 doorways, it really helps make that much more objective.
Well, and it helps to say, for Erik to say, well, James didn't like that, but I wasn't going for James as my audience on that one, so I'm okay with that. As long as I'm not, a 1 or a 2 in there, or, oh, James didn't like that, and this is my action scene, I really need to work on that.
Yeah.
So to be able to separate out the personality from the critique.
Well, we're going on 17 minutes, and I've got 2 questions in my mind. You guys
Let's keep going.
You want to keep going? Here's the first question, because it was something you said just a moment ago triggered this. All right, you hand off your critiques, you get this feedback based on the 4 doors. Do you guys, at that point, make your changes, make your revisions? Do each of you see it again? Do you revisit, or do you just say, there's my suggestions, there's my feedback, roll with it? I mean,
yes. It depends. There was a section in The Far Bank of the Rubicon where, if you know the 15 beats, and we've talked about the 15 beats before, it was The Promise of the Premise.
Yeah.
So in the first section of that book, I promise a run-up to war,
right?
Or possible preparation for war. That's what I promise. And then in the second section, I introduced the love story, which is what you're supposed to do. And my beta readers came back and said, this is not what I wanted. I didn't want a romance in the second section. I wanted war.
Yeah.
And I wanted a promise of war, and I wanted to run up to war, because that's what you said was going to happen. And I went, oh, I rewrote, in order to get my romance in there in the second section, I rewrote a chapter, I think, 5 times to get that chapter right, so it was able to do both.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of come up with a vehicle that allowed me to do both and reinvent the whole chapter. So that was kind of a big deal. And so that chapter he saw a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if it's just a general feedback thing where it's like, I need some tweaks here or there, we don't usually throw those chapters back at each other again. But that's really at the writer's discretion.
Yeah.
Now do you, when the book is all,
something over and be like, oh, it would help if you reread chapter 7, because I did a lot of rewriting there. But the rest of it is, I just did language level tweaks or whatever it is, and then new stuff starts at chapter 15, so read from there going forward, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, when the book is all said, when the draft is all said and done, you've done your critique from beginning to end, is there another reread from start to finish, or does it go straight to beta readers, or clean up and then beta?
And my process is I don't actually use beta readers at that point, which I know is dangerous, but I am a little bit in line with some of the writers who are like, beta readers are okay, but you're going to also write out your voice. And just like a professional editor that is really gearing your book to be the bestseller because they have to, for the big five, right? It has to sell 1 million copies for them to make money, a lot of money, and I think my beta readers will tend to gear my book away from my voice and the unique things I want to say and toward me more generic. So I have one beta reader that I trust that's outside this critique group. And he is also somewhat like James, giving me feedback along the way, but his feedback is less structured and much more about what does he feel about what I'm writing than anything.
Yeah, James, what do you do when the draft is, when Erik is done with his critiques and you've got this finished book? Where do you go from that point?
So my process on my current novel, we did all of the critiquing and we replotted it, and because of this critique group, I probably threw out a third of the book and rewrote it, which was good, painful, but good.
It is painful.
And then we re-critiqued it in here. I did all of that stuff and sent it off to beta readers, and now I have that feedback. And after a skim over that feedback, already a couple of them are fired. Like, I'm not going to ask them to work for me again, because one of them said, here's the way that you should plot this out in 3 different books. Here's the way you should replot your book.
They crossed that line, didn't they?
Yeah.
They're no longer a beta reader. Yeah, I got you. Well, one final question related to what my last question, and maybe you guys want to have something else to say about it, but when you have a critique group and you're sort of responsible for not only delivering to your fellow critique members, but also giving feedback, I'm curious, Erik, when James hands you something and says, okay, it's your turn to critique, usually it's a piece, right, like a chapter or half a chapter or something like that. How do you keep it in your mind? How do you, when I'm writing a book, I'm focused. And if I have to change gears and then come back to that book, I sometimes have to go back and reread the first 2 or 3 prior chapters. Do you guys find sometimes that you have to kind of go back and reread each other's stuff to know where you are, or?
Yeah, and I think that was particularly difficult because I ended up rewriting so many chapters in my book. I think my readers were having a hard time keeping up. And the other thing about my world is it's big, and there's lots of names, many planetary systems, many spaceships, many people, and so keeping all that stuff straight was hard for some of my beta readers. And I would get critique back, and from James, I'd be like, this doesn't make sense. But what that did was force me to ask, okay, why doesn't it make sense? We would piece it apart, and I would have to go back and then add more information to emphasize the information that I hadn't emphasized, particularly how much time had passed. That was a big thing that I kept missing, and I'd have to emphasize how much time had passed in a previous section so that he would be able to keep up.
Okay.
I think at the beginning that was true, right? When we first started, because I was coming into a world that already sort of existed for you, and I think, if I remember, you had already written the first half of Etna, and we started critiquing the second half.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so I was playing catch up and all of that. But for Erik's stuff, we've been in the same world for 2 years now. It'll be 2 years in October.
Yeah.
And so that that same world, I feel more comfortable there now.
Okay.
I think probably the same is true for my stuff. Like, we've inhabited each other's worlds long enough that it's almost it's like slipping on a glove and you're good.
You know what? I do have a final question for you guys. We've got about 4 minutes left before we hit the half-hour mark. So this one's to you, both of you. I want to know how you feel about this. You do provide critique services, correct? But when the books are out there and Amazon's selling them, what do you guys have any influence on or marketing? For one another? Do you sort of cross-tweet and things like that, or what do you guys do when the books are out there? Do y'all help one another at all with promoting your material?
We certainly have wrestled with how to market books, right? Which I still feel like is probably my weakness as a writer, is I don't feel like I've successfully found a way to market books. But some of that comes from the fact that selling books is still somewhat based on luck, and you can do all the prep work you want, and you can have a really great cover and a really great blurb, and it may not sell, and then you move on. The best answer is, move on to the next book.
Yeah, keep writing more.
Keep writing, write more, and then you've got the great thing about our business as self-published writers is that book is out there, and I always come back to Hugh Howey's Wool did not take off for 9 months before it was, before it went crazy after it was published. So it was 9 months, and so you can wait a year or more sometimes before your novel actually takes off. So yeah, direct answer to your questions. Yeah, we do cross promote some, not a lot. No, I don't think no one's under any pressure to do anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tweet about his stuff and he'll tweet about my stuff, and but it's usually just like we don't. So in promoting, there's a line you don't want to cross, like, because the big thing about promotion that I think we're both trying to do is be value-adding members of a community, right?
Yeah.
And so, this podcast, vlog, whatever you want to call it, vlog. Okay. It's adding value to a community, and it's still promoting. It's getting names out there and things like that. And so if we're both really careful to not cross that line, we'll talk about our stuff, but we won't spam people. I'll talk about his stuff, but I don't want to spam people.
I think I'm getting close right now.
Yeah.
I think I'm talking about my book probably just a little too much.
Well, you know what? Let's be fair. I was going to spend the last 3 minutes asking each of you to kind of talk about what it is, what's new on the horizon. With Erik, with you, I know I just got my hands on Rubicon. I'm about 50 pages in, and I'm fighting it because I'm going on vacation next week. Viewers, we will not be having an episode next week, so that's why we're going long today. I want to take the story with me next week and enjoy it, but I've also got it like taunting me, read me. And so I'm 50 pages in, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and just jump in and just start finishing it. I may be done by before we even head off on vacation.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to hearing what you say.
So my last question to you, we've got 2 minutes left. Erik, James, what's going on right now? We have Rubicon. James, what's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so my work that I hope to have done by the end of the summer, it's the fantasy novel, like we were talking about, the intimate fantasy. My working title right now is The Exiled Monk. Okay. The big things that I'm working on is getting actually music to go along with this, because in my world, music is magic. So I had my composer over a couple weeks ago, and he played me drafts of some of the songs, and they're sounding fantastic. But working with other creatives, working with my cover designer and doing art, my draft should be done by the end of August. That's my goal. And I'm also working on a sequel to my novel that's out. So the novel is Like Mind. I don't have a title, Like Mind 2, maybe, for the next one. I'm about 50% of the way done on that.
You know what? That one is such a great kind of like summer movie read. Yeah. It's a summer action flick in book form, and that one I think Like Mind 2 is the right title, right? Mm-hmm. And you just do Like Mind 3. Yeah. And 6 and 8.
Or I could do Two Like Two Mind or something.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Well, you know what, Erik? Don't forget, put links to these books up with this video so that our viewers can find it. Well, listen, guys, we are literally at our almost 30-minute mark. We did good, Erik. We didn't cross too long. James, I really appreciate you coming around.
Thanks for having me,
Erik. It was a good choice. When we're talking about critique groups, it kind of now makes sense that we should have more than one member of your critique group. Actually,
you don't want all my opinions. That wouldn't be fair. James needs to speak for himself.
Let's try to find a subject where James might be able to come back. And,
we'll do that in the future. We'll have plenty of them.
Well, listen, viewers, we're going to leave a surprise for next time. Erik and I don't know what we're going to talk about next, and I'm not even going to think about it since I'm going on vacation. But Erik, I'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll pick up right where we left off, and in the meantime, we can email back and forth some ideas about the next topic.
Sounds good, James.
James, good luck with your draft.
Yeah, thank you.
And Erik, good luck with Rubicon. It's out there. It's out in the wild.
It is out in the wild. The official launch day is August 10th, so look for some fireworks that day.
Cool. Viewers, thanks for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, please email them to Erik, and we will try to address them in a future vlog, blog, video cast, we're just going to say in a future video. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Eric, James, take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.